7 holes drilled in them at regular intervals. Although slightly damaged, they were still essentially intact. The one on the inner side of the leg was broken into 3 pieces, but the other one was still whole. Jiao Fanliang carefully scraped away the dirt with a piece of bamboo to expose it completely. The object was a flute that had been made from an animal bone. It had the color of yellow earth and was translucent. The surface of the flute was bright and shiny, and it gleamed like jade. In the 2 years that the excavation had been proceeding at the Jiahu site, this was the first time anyone had seen anything remotely like this. Zhang Zhuzhong searched his memory for any similar discovery made at Peiligang or sites of other ruins along the Yellow River, but he could think of none. What were these mysterious, tube-shaped articles? Zhang numbered the objects and placed them with the other artifacts. None of the archaeologists working on the Jiahu site, including Zhang himself, had any inkling that the discovery would raise the whole world's estimation of the level reached in prehistoric China in the field of music. During the excavation of grave M78 on May the 12th, 1986, 2 tube-shaped objects were discovered on each side of the left leg of a buried corpse. They appeared to have been made from the bone of an animal, and they each had 7 small holes drilled in a line on one side. The objects had the color of yellow earth, and they were translucent with a bright, shiny surface. In the 2 years since work on the site had begun, Zhang Zhuzhong, the head of the team, had never seen anything like them. What were these objects? The archaeologists agreed that, superficially at least, they looked very much like flutes used in Chinese folk music.
这个笛子呢，有笛膜孔，有吹口，它这个东西就是7个窟窿，既没有笛膜孔，又没有伤口，也没有吹口，就是7个窟窿。
These 2 bone tubes were different from modern flutes in that they didn't have stop holes or blow holes. Was it possible that they were musical instruments? Could music be played on them? As Zhang Zhuzhong was asking himself these questions, someone gave him an important piece of information. An academic conference was about to be held in Jiangzhou, the capital of Henan province, to celebrate the 450th anniversary of the birth of Zhu Zaiyu, the great musical genius of the Ming dynasty who invented the 12-tone scale. All the country's leading musicologists would be attending. If the tubes made of bone were indeed musical instruments, then perhaps the experts at the meeting could determine what kind of instrument they were.
我们到了那个他们开会的地方，找这些先生们想要他们看一看，给个鉴定，看是不是乐器。结果是，当时我们几个人拿着去了，说先找谁呢？说是1楼是一位先生，2楼一位先生，3楼一位先生，这都他们认识，这几位先生都是搞音乐史的。我说，他们说那干脆从1楼开始就找吧。 就找1楼，1楼这位先生呢，他看了以后，他说：“哎呦，这个笛子音控这么细，鼓管呢，也不算粗，音控这么小，比较是吹出来音呢，估计不成音列，可能顶多是打擂的哨子，不一定是乐器。”这给我们浇了一盆凉水。
In 1973. A Neolithic age site was discovered in the Yangtze River Valley at Hemudu, 20 kilometers from the city of Ningbo in Zhejiang province. Among the artifacts found were more than 160 bone whistles, each 6 to 8 centimeters long. They had 2 small finger holes, one in the front and the other in the back, and pleasant sounds could be made by blowing into the whistles while blocking one or both holes. The hunters at He Mu Du used whistles to mimic the mating calls of deer in order to lure them close enough for hunters to make a kill. But were the bone tubes unearthed at the Jiahu ruins really hunting whistles? Of all the articles uncovered from the Jiahu site related to production, 49.5% were used in hunting. Numerous remains of deer, leopards and hares were uncovered from ash pits at the site, and this tended to confirm that the people who lived there were skilled hunters. This naturally lent credibility to the hypothesis that these bone tubes were whistles. But if they were whistles, why couldn't they produce any sound? Zhang Zhuzhong found this very perplexing. Zhang Zhuzhong had no way of knowing that Xiao Xinhua, the person in charge of the conference, would be the one to eventually unravel the mystery. When Zhang Zhuzhong left the conference, a good chance to discover the secret of the bone tubes had been lost. The mystery would remain unsolved for another year, until Zhang Zhuzhong and Xiao Xinhua would finally meet.
In the course of the 2-year excavation, many questions arose that Zhang Zhuzhong found puzzling. One of these questions concerned the people buried at the site. The corpses showed that by the standards of the Neolithic age, the people living in Jiahu were extremely tall.
The average height of the men buried at the site was between 170 and 180 centimeters, and of the women, between 165 and 170 centimeters. Some were even taller than 170 centimeters. Moreover, most of the people were well built. By comparison, the men at Ban Po in Xi'an, which thrived during a slightly later era, were mostly around 168 to 169 centimeters tall. The people at Jiahu literally stood head and shoulders above their contemporaries at other sites in the Yellow River Valley. Could it be that they weren't originally from the Central Plains, but had migrated there from somewhere else? In the follow-up research, anthropologists measured the width of the skull, wing of the nose, upper alveolar arch, and the tooth sizes of a number of the Jiahu skeletons. They concluded that the measurements for the Jiahu people were in complete accord with the standards of Neolithic age peoples in the Yellow and Yangtze River valleys. In other words, the physiognomy of the Jiahu people was clearly different from that of the peoples from south of the Yangtze River and those north of the Great Wall. It was, however, very similar to that of the peoples from the Central Plains. In addition, the skulls of the Jiahu people had an oval shape with an arrow-like protrusion on top, and the side of the skull was shaped like a circular arc. In 1943, the anthropologist Wei Dunrui determined that these were characteristics of the skulls of Mongolians. We can therefore conclude that the residents of Jiahu were the ancestors of the present-day residents of the Central Plains. But why were the residents of Jiahu so much taller than their ethnically similar contemporaries? Zhang Zhuzhong hoped that further excavations at the site would answer this question. In the autumn of 1986, excavation at the site began to extend to the north. In pit T101 in the northwest section, archaeologists again found a large number of corpses buried in layers. The skeleton in grave M233 was more fortunate than the one in M78. Even though the grave was damaged from above, the skeleton was still completely intact. Zhang Zhuzhong gently used a brush to remove the dirt. As he did so, two tube-like objects could be seen buried next to the thigh of the skeleton. Zhang Zhuzhong carefully cleared away the dirt to uncover the tubes completely. The lower of the two was broken, but even so, it was still evident that it originally had 7 small holes, and the two ends both retained a portion of the joints. The upper one, light brown in color, was about 22 centimeters long. It was completely intact and was clearly the same kind of object as the ones found in grave M78. The only difference was that the side where the holes were drilled had been ground smooth, so that the placement of the holes was even more regular than those on the tubes from M78. Generally, in any archaeological dig, only one example of each kind of object is uncovered. If a second example is found, it is regarded as highly significant. Zhang Zhuzhong understood this very well. The whistles found at He were made by members of a hunter-gatherer society, and the sounds they made were crude imitations of the sounds made by animals. By contrast, the bone tubes at Jiahu were exquisitely crafted. It was difficult to imagine that people had gone to so much trouble to make something this beautiful, and then use it only for luring game. Zhang Zhuzhong tried to find a clue as to their purpose from the rest of the contents of grave M233. Fortunately, they were well preserved. Burial objects had been placed on both sides of the head of the deceased. Zhang was particularly intrigued by the tortoise shells placed on the left side of the head. In total, there were 6 of them, and each one was filled with round black and white stones of various sizes. One side of each of the tortoise shells had been filed down, and they had become shiny from long use. They were probably objects the person had used on a regular basis. Zhang Zhuzhong discovered that on the bellies of all 6 of the tortoise shells, 3 symbols had been engraved with a sharp object. Zhang Zhuzhong was not, of course, surprised to see symbols carved on tortoise shells. The tortoise shells discovered in grave M94 also bore symbols. The problem was, it was impossible to know if they indicated anything significant or not. Zhang Zhuzhong noticed that the objects buried with this corpse were very different from those in the other graves. If he could work out the status and role of this person in the society, he might be able to gain a clue as to what the bone tubes were used for. Of all the objects in the grave, the tortoise shells would most likely provide the clue he was seeking.
China's ancient inhabitants believed that of all the animals, the tortoise best understood humans. They attributed this ability to the tortoise's longevity and its great wisdom. So were the tortoise shells uncovered at Jiahu used to divine the future? And if this were the case, did the bone tubes with holes play a role in the accompanying rituals? In the next edition of our program, we'll continue the exploration of Jiahu village with the archaeologists. Please tune in again then. And thank you for staying with us on today's New Frontiers. I'm Ji Xiaojun on CCTV International. Bye.